Hi, my name is René and I built the certificate expired challenge. That was kind of hard thing to do because what can you do to expire a certificate? Well, actually nothing. You cannot force a certificate to expire. So instead we had to do a workaround where we do not expire the certificate but actually just pull the certificate from the website and make HTTPS traffic required. So what we did is we created a container that has links to the certificates and the web application that you are using. And on every web application we put a wildcard certificate, star GDBC2019.com. That wildcard certificate is generated with Let's Encrypt and has a validity of 3 months. That's the default at Let's Encrypt. So what we do in the provisioning, we create team projects in Azure DevOps for every team. We create Azure resources for every team, and then we create a queue for the build of every team to actually deploy the websites. After that, we had a waiting loop that all the websites of the teams were actually deployed, and we put this wildcard certificate on every single website. So when you start the challenge and the container on the backend is started, that actually triggers the disruption. The only thing that we do is we pull this wildcard certificate from your website so that it doesn't allow HTTPS traffic anymore because the certificate is not valid, and then you will run into trouble, and that's what we actually want. We also faced some issues with Let's Encrypt. Because when we were building the challenge, everything was fine with Let's Encrypt. Because Let's Encrypt lets you generate certificates and upload them to your website, and everything is fine. But in order to upload them to your website, you need to have a valid domain name. In this case, yourteam.gdbcchallenges.com. So in order to give you a valid domain name, we also set up an Azure DNS on our site, and that Azure DNS we filled with all the entries of all the teams. So it's team1 GDBCchallenges.com. And because we already know how your team was called and how your team will actually appear on Azure, we pointed that to team1.azurewebsites.net. So this Azure DNS was already pre-populated before your website was even live. The wildcard certificate that was on your website could read this domain name, of course, because it's a wildcard certificate. And when you are generating a certificate with Let's Encrypt, you have to upload a file to your own website. That file can be then added to the Acme challenges, what you already probably did in your challenge, and then you can Let's Encrypt validate that you actually own that website. So you don't need to do anything because we have provisioned everything on our backend in Azure DNS. The final thing we faced was what Let's Encrypt itself. After testing a few 10, 20, 30 times a day, Let's Encrypt said, well, we are not allowing any more certificates from this IP address. You have to wait for another 2 weeks. So after some looking and searching, we found that Let's Encrypt also has this notion of a Let's Encrypt staging directory. And this staging directory allows you to do tens of thousands requests for the same domain. So that is what you are using in your challenges. You have to look and run the Let's Encrypt staging server. The only disadvantage of that is that the certificates that the staging server actually generates are not signed with a valid root authority. So we cannot provide you a real valid certificate. You can do it when pointing to Let's Encrypt, but then we will run into the quotas of Let's Encrypt. So that's why in the challenges we chose, we let you do all the steps that you can do with the staging server. It generates certificates and you can upload them. But the final step, actually using the certificate, we have replaced that with using the wildcard certificate, because that is already valid and signed by a root authority. So that's why. Please look into other ways of renewing certificates. Azure has some default built-in options for that, but we actually want you to do it manually. And why? Because when you're not running on Azure, but maybe locally, or maybe on another cloud or whatever, you can also use this mechanism and using Let's Encrypt to generate your certificates without having to have the Azure functionality to renew your certificates. But it's definitely worth taking a look at. Hope you enjoyed it.